Hello, everyone. I hope you are having a fantastic weekend and a beautiful Sunday. Welcome back to another episode of Walk, Talk, and Rock. I am your host, Xaiyeon, and today we're going to be talking about a really beloved series that belonged to the Nintendo family that I thought I talked about Fire Emblem. All right, Fire Emblem, Fire Emblem. Oh man. So, we all know the new Fire Emblem game, real quick, is coming out next month, so that's why we're talking about it. And today, the section we'll be talking about for this Fire Emblem is, Fire Emblem, before it became huge, it was a niche game, although be it not a really niche genre. Tactics, turn-based, was already kind of popular. And the second section we'll talk about Awakening and how that revived Fire Emblem and made relationship gameplay, which later turned into a huge pop culture and controversial thing, which I feel is very sad. Then section three, we're going to talk about how that culture, the love, the children, the generational systems, and the shifting of Fire Emblem culture became super toxic. Then we'll talk about the Switch era and how Nintendo transitioned and how Fire Emblem basically lobotomized itself. But there is other series that have really taken some of those things that became stripped down from Fire Emblem into their own hands. Such as Record of Agris War, which is another popular series back in the day, which I wish was still around because it was literally only the other game that was better than Fire Emblem. And then lastly, we'll talk about Fortune's Weave and the future of Fire Emblem in general. All right, so let's get started. Let me pop some buffs, I guess. But even having, I might as well use these. I'm not using them. All right, so Fire Emblem, Fire Emblem, Fire Emblem. Where do we start? Before Fire Emblem became the game where everybody argued about who they should marry, and what kind of characters they should build. It was a game where your favorite character died because you moved them too far, or you could have cared less. Especially in a lot of the Fire Emblem series, where the difficulty you played on was the hardest one, which could have been Chaos or Lunatic. It was actually necessary in certain battles where you actually had to sacrifice a permadeath of one of your characters, and usually people would choose the characters they liked less, and that's fine. You know, in war, people die, and that's just something that's you just have to, you can't escape. It's inevitable, and I guess a lot of people kind of fell into category that they didn't want anyone dying. And so, in some of them, you can actually revive them or they come back to life, but it was usually story based. Anything gameplay wise, once your character is dead, they are dead from the game forever. So, Fire Emblem's whole identity, as it first appeared, sorry, was tactical positioning, limited resources, so you had to plan. Although it didn't really have like a complex night day system and whatnot, it still had system where you had to plan or prepare for battle, and you were able to like train units individually or get EXP. And it was basically like a day-to-day basis in that game where you had an allocated time and like a simple calendar system. And the people that developed Fire Emblem really put great emphasis in that. Once we had Fire Emblem, Three Houses, which came out on the Nintendo Switch, which was really nice. I liked it, but they got rid of a lot of systems that really made the Fire Emblem series special, in my opinion. such as, the emotional attachment and the generational system. Like I said, I mentioned some other games, and there's a lot. There's some Star Children. These are game series. Record of Agris War. And I mean, even the monster games, such as like Monster Rancher and whatnot, were great, but people weren't really having emotional attachment to these characters as they did strongly with Fire Emblem. Which I think is, yeah, it's probably not a healthy thing. But, you have to have moderation and some willpower. I just really liked the dynamic of how it added to the gameplay, because it actually just forces you to think more about who you will partner up with on the battlefield. I don't know, it just seemed more fun, but I guess people took it really seriously. So the core genius that made Fire Emblem special in the game of Rising Tactics, we had Final Fantasy Tactics and other tactics games like Tactics Ogres, and this tank one. And there were so many. I'm sorry, I can't really remember. There's really a lot of tactic games back then, especially in the PlayStation era, no PS1. and you had all these popular characters in the Fire Emblem series that kind of carried on through the series. It was just like Cain, Abel, Marth, Zeta, who else? Lucina, Crom, Robin, Violet, and you basically experience this like whole unparalleled universe. And the only way they connect each of their universes or worlds is by having cameos and artifact appearances, where you discover something in the game that's related to like either the past or the future, and they like mirror that character, just to keep the series fresh, I guess, for even old fans, because some people really love seeing their character in the game, and it makes it wonder, if they're relevant or not, which I enjoy too. Such they had that a lot with like Revelations and Fate, because I remember they had the dual version for the 3DS, and you could have played either two sides, and it was like a Japanese style Fire Emblem. And the unique thing about Fire Emblem is it's had a very amazing, unorthodox, well, like before, like bonding system. So you're able to bond with your characters, and it would somewhat increase their stats and chances of doing combo attacks together with other units on the battlefield. And that was really like more of the special parts of Fire Emblem, because even in the first games of Fire Emblem, they didn't really have, the generation system. And I think games like Record of Agris War actually took the generation system to a whole nother level. Like that got those people need to come back and make Regress of Agris War, like Record of Agris War 0, Record of Agris 2, and all that. Are really great. I enjoyed those games a lot more than I did Fire Emblem, to be honest. And then we have games like Disgaea, whatever. Almost the same concept. Same genre. But more wacky and crazy fun. And then you had other smaller indie titles like Phantom Brave and whatnot. All of these titles are good. They just contributed to the genre itself, so it can attract more people into the SRT strategy. TRT, turn-based strategy game, or I mean a strategy. Oh my god, I'm butchered. Well, anyways, Fire Emblem's greatest trick was making a chess piece feel like a person. So like, even though with most of these games, each unit had their strengths and weaknesses, you would even try to make the character's weakness moderately like one of their strong points, you know? Like people were literally speccing their characters to survive the battle as much as they could, even though they would fight enemies that were obviously going to beat them, such as like an archer versus horse or cavalry, or like a flyer versus a warrior or something. And that's the cool thing, is because in Fire Emblem, even unique offspring could transform into different kind of classes based on what your parent character mastered. You know, like that was very evident in like Awakening and the other Fire Emblem game, where you could have had like a flyer with like the Paldia and that one girl with a spear, and yeah, it was just good. And then like Severa and the other guy, like the wolf guy, like, it was just great because like people could really put in their own preference into the game and watch how their team tackles the content. So, but first we'll go to the beginning. Well, you know, Shadow Dragon and the Blade of Light. This is very old. But we actually have Marth, Arachnia, and just very simple, classic tactical foundation, you know. Nothing too crazy, you just move to a square or whatnot, you attack, defend. Nothing crazy. It was grid combat, you had weapon management, simple recruitment, characters, and then you make your army. And you just fight against monsters, you know, very basic. And that right there is the building blocks of Fire Emblem. But it wasn't too popular back in the days. And then you have the one that really brought it to stardom, Mystery of the Emblem. It really expanded Marth's story. It gave him a character. It gave his life purpose and meaning, other than do this and do that. Listen to what you're told. And Fire Emblem started to become an important series even before Nintendo started marketing and advertising at this point for the genre itself. As later, we had the genealogy of the Holy War, which expands, you know, past the part where Marth is serving his nation and the other nations start going to war with each other. And this is where we had our first little glimpse of generations. This is a retrospective of the marriage system, which first appeared here. Characters fall in love, resulting in children abilities depending on appearance. Which is so weird that they took that system out once it became a globally successful. Like, I don't know why. I mean, I do know why. People are just too crazy. Or someone just doesn't understand life that well. No idea. So you are essentially deciding during these battles who you carefully pair your characters with, and the characters that you build relationships and help them get the offsprings that yield better stats or better looks. Some of these correlate to inheriting the looks of the parent characters, such as like the eye color, the hairstyle, the face, the height, and everything like that, which was really cool. I liked it. An enjoyable system. It also changes what weapons they inherit, as well as special abilities. And the story itself changes depending on, you know, which generation of child or kid that you have gotten. Like, you could have changed each pairing differently, and they always had dialogue, and there were so many choices. But now this part is where I understand if Nintendo or the developers of Fire Emblem have to make a lot of chat dialogue and a lot of conditional flags. Imagine if they had like 30 characters and then they had to make children. That's a lot. And sometimes I think there was some that even had twins. I forgot which one that was. And it just adds more work for them. So I guess they wanted to reduce that overhead and just really focus on the gameplay, as I guess the generational system is more of a added little flavor or bonus to the series itself. I mean, because most of the time you just continue what was going on in the previous war, and they would have the time skip of like 20 years, which in storytelling perspective doesn't really make any sense if you're splitting up the game into two parts that just drag on the story, which I understand. You know, if it was like a situation, as an example, of like World War One, and then you had the generation system continue up to World War Two, which would make sense, then yeah, the story would be a bit more powerful because it definitely has a lot of closure and more interesting dynamic. You know, it would have been said that if you're going to make a story like that, you should definitely show some of the nations in the war get destroyed, and some of the emerging ones pick up the battle and introduce new gameplay mechanics like weapons and tactical maneuvers and whatever. So genealogy didn't just let you recruit characters; it made you responsible for producing, you know, the next set of characters you'll be using in the game, which I really liked. And I think the only game that does this really well is Record of Agris War Zero, and the other games from that series. Like they do it really well. I really wish those developers were still around. Well, let me look at that. Let me look at that for a second. Record of Agris War. Oh, it was made by Idea Factory and Compile Heart. Oh, they're the same creators of Hyperdimension Neptunia. No way. Guys, you need to come back to the scene. You need to make Record of Agris War. Man, no one's here anymore. Actually, it doesn't matter. Alright, let me find a new game real quick. So just like Fire Emblem, Record of Agris War plays like a strategic RPG, and the game has a dating sim, and they call their system the soul breeding. So like, you build up soul with them, and you have to meet certain requirements for them to actually breed. But it even falls through with similar concepts, you know, like abilities and stuff like that. But yeah, there's not really that many in this game for Record of Agris War, which I think is really disappointing because I like that one more. And then we also had some other references like Thracia 776, another game for like the old Fire Emblem that started actually implementing new systems for like difficulty, capturing enemies, fatigue mechanics, and all that good stuff. And this is where I believe these games start to really involving member management, resource management, and even your relationship management. Because most of the time you could only give gifts or spend time with certain characters per calendar day. But this was more introduced, like I said, later on in the series of Fire Emblem. And we'll take a quick peek at the Game Boy Advance era. We had the Binding Blade, which brings about another popular character, Roy's my boy. You know, a very extremely popular character, extremely evident when he was released for Super Smash Bros. Melee, and then future Smash Bros. Games. They had the Holy Trinity of Marth, Crom. Is it Crom? I think it's marked Crom, Roy, and Lucina, and then Robin. And then later on Violet, which I thought was super awesome. And this really pushed the Western audience to be like, damn, who is this Roy character? And I bet a lot of people that did play Smash Brothers Melee decided to try out Fire Emblem because he was kind of a pretty good character. He was okay, and it really piqued the interest. And I think this is where we start to see Fire Emblem really have a huge audience during 2004 to 2012. And I think this was really kind of like the golden era for Fire Emblem in general, or 2015 or something like that. And then we had the Blazing Blade, which was later actually just called Fire Emblem when released here in North America. We had Eliwood, Hector, Lyn, and this one was particularly good because all the characters were unique and recognizable. You know, that's really one of the key features about Fire Emblem. Is I honestly think Fire Emblem kind of paved the way for a lot of gachapon games today that we see that has a lot of characters that you can summon for, you know. And it's crazy because later on we had Fire Emblem's Heroes or something, some sort of Fire Emblem game that was a mobile gacha, and you summon for different kinds of Fire Emblem characters. So yeah, I really think Fire Emblem series mostly pioneered that beginning for these gachapon character games like Genshin Impact and all this nonsense. You know, really Nintendo and the developers that made these games really pioneered their success or innovated in that direction. Now that I think about it, it really makes a lot of sense. So I assure you that a lot of people that probably play these gachapon games probably also play Nintendo games. Further along, we have the Sacred Stones, you know, with Erica, Ephraim, which also makes cameo appearances in the future series of the game, especially like with these map story battles, historical battles in some of them, like Awakening and the previous titles. But this one really gives a world map, branching storyline, so now you actually can like have an input, and it would kind of affect the ending of what you get. This is where we have multiple endings introduced and a lot of possibilities of grinding, training, leveling up your weapons, leveling up your characters, and leveling up the relationships. And then we move on to the Tellius era, which is one of the more popular protagonists. This is really heavy. This is way before, well, not way that before, but you know, there wasn't really much social justice warriors and very opinionated people back in the day. There was racism, nations conflicting, like with ideas, wars, I guess, and like criticizing class structure, and you know, all these problems are just seen throughout the year ever since humans have existed. And honestly, I don't think it's a big deal. You know, people should just be more aware. I mean, what kind of world do you want? You want everybody to have no brain? Jesus, you're not looking for a world to live in. You're just looking for, I don't know, you're not looking for life, that's for sure. I'm looking for life. Then we have Path of the Radiance. Oh, this is the one. Ike. Sorry, I totally forgot about Ike. He is the two-hand sword wielder. And Ike, I feel like, was really popular because even men that didn't really play video games were really drawn into Ike because he gets off that, he's that really manly guy, you know, and he's just like the tough it out kind of person. You know, you got to deal with the world with your high head held high, and to just always get up and keep fighting to death, whatever. Well, he really gave that Roman Empire general kind of vibe. And then we had the golden era, Radiant Dawn. Massive cast of characters. Everybody was so excited. If you were a Fire Emblem fan at this point, you were eating good. You were eating so good. You were becoming fat AF. It continued the political story. You know, it fed you more. And then you started to really grow attached to the characters. Oh, sorry, I'm tired. That was crazy. I'm tired already. Grown attached to the characters, and you wanted to see their conflict through. It was harder. It had difficulty. It was massive. There was more missions that you could take, and it was very ambitious. And Nintendo and the developers of Radiant Dawn really put a lot of effort into the game. You know, not so much the graphics or anything, but just the atmosphere, the setting, and everything. What they did, it really goes to show how amazing you were eating back then with Radiant Dawn. Like, I don't think any Fire Emblem today comes close to Radiant Dawn, and even Awakening. Like, oh my god, what is going on? And before Three Houses made political Fire Emblem fashionable, Tellius was already doing war, racism, combat, and morally woke things, right? See, like, this is before we popularized the word or term woke. Like, what the hell is that bullshit? Some propaganda. People were woke when they were born in the year zero, in Stone Age. Like, I don't understand. What do you want us to be, stupid? And Fire Emblem really challenged a lot of these ideas politically, and most of the time, that was most of the conflict, right? It was mostly these themes of light versus dark, especially evidently clear into like Revelation, Fate, is it Fire Emblem Fates and Fire Emblem Revelation? You know, I think it was okay. So then the audience, or like people were thinking that what made Fire Emblem like kind of drop off? And it's because like they just nerfed the content and got rid of a lot of themes, because I guess it's being advertised as rated E for everybody, you know, E, not M, for suggestive themes and violence. But I digress. What is your favorite 3DS one? Genealogy, Blazing Blade, Sacred Stone, Path of Radiance, Radiant Dawn, or Awakening? Maybe I'm missing some. But for now, Fire Emblem reached a point where the series itself was starting to fall into deep danger, because the game had set up to change what people thought Fire Emblem even was. Some people even thought that Fire Emblem was low-key propaganda, which is crazy, man. You can read about some conspiracy theories and things like that. But in the end, it's just a game. Like, I treated it like a game at the very least. So here is the turning point. But I still think it was a good game. Awakening. The game that literally changed everything, and low-key the future of Fire Emblem in general. Fire Emblem Awakening basically took 30 years of Fire Emblem and said, this is where they were like, the magnum opus of Fire Emblem right here. They put literally everything into this game. Every single system that they had. Basic calendar system, missions, alternate timelines, endless mode, difficulty, spikes, breeding, relationship, everything. Awakening was literally designed as a celebration for the franchise, lasting as long as it has, and it worked. Awakening became a breakout hit. It was so popular that even your grandma would put her social security check into getting you the 3DS and Fire Emblem Awakening, not even on your birthday. That's how popular it was. Your grandma was going bankrupt for the 3DS and Fire Emblem Awakening because it had everything. It had the classical tactical maps. It even had different combat modes, I believe. You could have switched between classic and then like modern. And you could also have the isometric or 3D, I think. You had casual modes. You had a custom avatar. You had reclassing. So even if you didn't like the character's current class, you can respec them into different class. And they also had job advancements, which is so freaking cool. And then you have your pair up system. And this decides, like I said, what your generational or child characters would be similar to as. You had supports. So when you're attacking enemies or even defending or getting attacked, sometimes there's a probability chance where characters would do a support attack or defend or protect, which is very popular against like defense units. You had marriage, children, like I said. You even had time travel. You even had grinding, like I said, like the endless mode dungeon. You had a lot of DLC with a lot of recruitable characters, even characters from other parts of the series, like I said. And then it was just a huge cast. And then you had the anime style presentation, you know, kind of like a visual novel, and cutscenes were phenomenal. Yeah, I'm telling you, everybody was eating good. Everybody was obese at this point. But now this is where everybody got a heart attack, alright? Suddenly, somewhere down the line, maybe due to political reasons and how people were seeing Fire Emblem as, they really, I think they really contacted Nintendo and the developer, and they kind of got in trouble because they had a lot of themes and a lot of innuendos, and I don't know. I don't think it's probably unhealthy, but I think we should teach those people that enough is, you know, there's always limits. People were shipping characters and fantasizing about their character, you know. I think this is the time where somebody married their 3DS. That's crazy. So yeah, there was a lot of controversy about Fire Emblem Awakening. Well, not to move on too far to the point, there's permadeath, and people were like, I don't want to restart a 40-minute map because Donald got stabbed. This is one of the escort missions, and you could like recruit these characters later on, and it's just funny. And then, you know, the marriage system. You had different types of marriage systems where you can get rankings for the characters that you paired up together. It wasn't like who you would ship either. It was basically like, how can you build the strongest team for the next part of the game. It also gave you ideas of like stat building, because you could work on their stats and give them strengths. And excuse me, each character had inherently stronger stats than other classes versus other classes, you know. I'm trying to remember an example. I guess like Sabra, Thief, and Speed, you know, Assassin and Ninja, whatever. And then like other classes where they have a shield, is more tank driven and stuff like that. But you could totally turn them into a mage, like Darja can totally be a sword fighter and whatnot. You literally could do whatever you want. So like Crown, his partner is Lucina, and your Lucina could be like a strong mage, a strong flyer, a strong assassin, or a strong mage. I think I said that already. And this matters much because in Awakening, Lucina basically inherits this, and now you have to take care of the catastrophe, and it just brings the story into a more interesting state. Like the story actually picks up usually on the next generation, because most of the first generation is just like you trying to build up your characters for the real climax of the story, which is fine and great. So Awakening didn't only bolt the the babies into the dating simulator, but it made the children prove that your current army has a future worth saving. And now you're wondering, like, there's even some playthroughs where you can make all the characters die, but I believe it stops you. Like, you get the bad ending if you don't have the minimum amount of characters to continue, because you don't have enough offspring. But I digress. I think if the main character dies, you actually fail the game and you're just forced to start all over. You're correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure you can just literally get game over and you have to make a new file. You can play on the hardest difficulty with permadeath. But why? Why did the Awakening blow up? Well, optimization, anime, JRPG, progression, romance, completionist. It was good for casual players that just wanted to have fun. Hardcore players, lunatic mode, and Lucina was such an icon for Fire Emblem. Like, I can't believe we forgot about our queen, Lucina. Like, these recent Fire Emblems, they all low-key suck. Like, they freaking suck, in my opinion. Nothing comes close to our queen, Lucina. She was beautiful, elegant, and intelligent. And then we had, like, Robin, Crom, Tharja, Cordelia, yeah, that's one of the red-haired girl. And Morgan and Anna, which was like the lucky thief. Kind of like a merchant. She was like a merchant, an optional character. But she appears as a cameo in many of the Fire Emblem series as that like traveling merchant. And you could like buy items from her and whatnot. So she's kind of just there all the time. You don't really question her existence. And I really don't want to think about it too much anyway. It's just a nice little mascot, I guess. That's part of the series. And once Fire Emblem discovered that people willing to spend hours in both optimizing combat and marriage, well, this is where the developers, I think, yeah, it's Intelligent Systems, right? And Nintendo learned it hard. Alright. Fire Emblem somehow became the only Nintendo franchise where people were saying, I'm gonna optimize my bloodline, or I'm gonna breed the best offspring. And imagine how that would feel when like your 10-year-old is saying that. And I guess it kind of was, I guess the adults at the time found it unacceptable, or just weird. And all of a sudden you have like teenagers talking about breeding and all that stuff and shipping and relationship, which I think at that age was fine, because in the past, actually, the best time to become a mother back then, the most opportune time was, at the age of 13. Crazy enough to say that. We can't forget about the past, but we gotta incorporate the past as a reference to decisions we make today. We just can't forget about that stuff. Like back in the day, people were having kids when they were 13, which I think is still an acceptable age, but not what's that word, mentally, because your brain doesn't mature until around your early 20s, late 20s for males, which makes sense. Moreover, we move on to Fire Emblem Fates, which really dwindled down the systems that Awakening had. Not too much, but it was very noticeable because you couldn't really interact as much, and I think there was very limited options in the breeding system as well, because they were all separated, and the story it was just really basic, right, compared to Awakening, and it's very controversial theme, which was mostly about racism. So here we go. The children are raised in other dimensions where times flow differently, and they actually become adults really quickly, and you actually continue the second part of the game relatively quickly. But then the game slows down, and this is where you spend most of your time. And it was mostly about, I think they introduced base management, so you were able to build and level up building structures in order to get gold and resources to help you further your advantage in battle. So now we're combining stats, skills, classes, support, and that was a good design, right, on their part. Slowly adding other features while they were stripping away the relationship and the breeding and all that. Made me kind of disappointed. And I guess that was good for those people that didn't like it. Well, for the hardcore Fire Emblem fans, I guess our love for the series started to dwindle, and it greatly dwindled. Well, not greatly dwindled, but sort of dwindled once we had, Fire Emblem Three Houses, and then later like Fire Emblem Engage, and then like now Fire Emblem just sucks. And we have the perfect game, like I said, Record of Agris War. Agris had the Soul Breed system, and the storyline didn't span like 2 generations like Fire Emblem. Nah. Record of Agris War, everybody, spanned 5 generations. I had a buffet on that one. Like, oh my god. Like, if you're really looking for something, you gotta play it. Even though it's an old game right now. Record of Agris War, Record of Agris War 0, and Record of Agris 2. They go through multiple generations in that game. And it's awesome. Like, oh my god. They need to make another one. I would pay $1 billion. And the theme for Agris it's more of a darker version of Fire Emblem in my opinion. Which is good. Life is all about being dark and light. Agris War didn't make children side characters. It was literally the reproduction of New Game Plus. That's right, you New Game Plus with your previous generation of characters, and you can keep going. That's the sick part. Like you should just keep going. Like they really programmed that game extremely well, and I don't think there is no other game like Record of Agris War. Like, quote me on this. Even intelligent systems doesn't look intelligent anymore. Damn, they really put Fire Emblem in the shitter. Like, even though the story may not be as powerful, because like the world building was not that great, to be honest, and the gameplay system, or like the graphics in general, weren't really that great. But man, Record of Agris War, wow, Chef's Kiss, 10. Oh, actually, since I would usually not give 10, that game's a 10 out of 10, since there has been nothing else. 10 out of 10. And another older game is, like Phantasy Star, where they had marriages. So I'm just mentioning other titles here. We have like Romancing Saga, Crusader Kings, each having their own type of style of inheritance and whatnot. Oh man, and Crusader Kings was especially popular. Not to say that we also had like Dynasty Warriors started implementing these kind of systems, where your characters can form relationships and you just like have your empires like evolve. I mean, not evolve, sorry. Have children inheriting the next part of your empire with the characters. Yeah, oh my god, we need empires back in our life. And I feel like a lot of this is where everything was cooking. If you really were a fan of, I guess the generational breeding system and offspring system and relation, you were eating good. At this point, from like 2008 to 2016 or 18, you were eating good here. And we had Pokemon breeding. Well, that's nothing special. And then, like I said, returning to the pop culture effect. That really probably made a toxic turn, sadly, with like shipping, fan art, romance tier list, best girl, best husband, fan fiction went wild. And holy crap, the amount of fan fiction for Awakening is crazy, especially with the like the wolf characters. I mean the furry characters. Sorry. Goddamn, it's crazy. I didn't really read that one, but it's there. And then you had your program that, you had your argument that it's like, oh my god, it's not even about the game anymore. It's literally just about, the softcore. And I guess this is where it really took a turn for Nintendo, because no one cared about the game story anymore. It was just all about the characters and who they're shipping with. And honestly, that is a pretty strong hit to the brand image of Fire Emblem. You're not a game based about war and history now. You're a game that's based on like breeding shit. Like I can see that now. You know, that's very understandable. I can see why Nintendo and Intelligent Systems stripped away the system in future Fire Emblem titles, because that's not really a family-friendly theme, right? It's not family-friendly. It's more of a hentai game now, which people also argued, you know, Fire Emblem was kind of low-key turning into a hentai game. So I didn't want Fire Emblem to remove romance. I wanted Fire Emblem to make romance mechanically important again, right? Because they later added into like the other versions, still part of the 3DS and even the Nintendo Wii U, I believe, you could interact with your characters. You were able to pet them, to massage them. And this is where we kind of got into the weird territory, you know, like now people were expressing like I said, is Fire Emblem a strategy game or is it a dating hentai game? And people were, you know, were really skeptical and very understandable. How they had to put some lobotomy into those people. You know, they had to give them the, you know, they got to give them the Vicks. And so Fire Emblem started, you know, digressing. And that brings me to, you know, should the next Fire Emblem bring back marriage and children? You know, in a healthy way, right? We should put that game back into a healthy way. And we don't really need that touch features and those massage features, whatever. But just being able to have the characters build a rapport, you know, with other characters, it is very acceptable, in my opinion. But who knows? Maybe they'll bring it back into this next Fire Emblem, Fortune's Wave. I don't know. And then we have Fire Emblem Three Houses, which is good. The game was really popular because it replaced family generation with a new type of kink, faction attachment. So now players were torn between what faction they wanted to represent. And you had three amazing factions. You had the Black Eagles, the Blue Lions, and the Golden Deer. Oh my god. And you were able to choose one and totally made the game have a higher replayability. Now this is how they compensated, right? So now instead of having the generational system, right, and being able to play one part of the story and then the second part of the story, now they diverted into playing three different point of views of the story, which is a smart move by Intelligent Systems. Now you didn't have to worry about the character brooding and all that stuff, but that made me very sad. That was the only interesting thing to me, having played like Record of Agris War and those other games I mentioned, and coming back to Fire Emblem Three Houses, which I wasn't disappointed, honestly. But I just didn't have the same emotional attachment that I did when I was playing the other games, right? Because Fire Emblem Three Houses, I literally was like, I don't care if half my characters died, honestly. Because you just focused on your main character, which is like an androgynous Byleth. And that was pretty much it. And then you had like one or two characters you actually liked that were part of the game, which is not supposed to distract you from the whole purpose of the game, where the story was kind of lackluster as well, you know, basically light and dark theme again, good and evil, which is fine. That's really Life Halls is about anyway. Then you had Edelgard, one of the greatest Fire Emblem characters in the recent generation. Edelgard, was she a villain, a hero, revolutionary? Nah, she was literally all of the above. The queen. And you had Dimitri, Claude, Rhea, and then, you know, Violet. And the only strengths, honestly, for Three Houses was, I guess, they improved on the character writing, because you can also do like each character's little stories, conversations as you progress through the game, which added more character development. Then, and you had world building. Other than that, this game sucked, okay? Like, I think I honestly felt that I just wanted to beat the game just because I wanted to beat the game. But there was nothing really drawing me in. If you play a lot of JRPGs, RPGs, or games in general, you begin to see a lot of similarities. And for me, Fire Emblem Three Arrows was just a generic game. Like, it didn't have anything that didn't make it special anymore. Like, that's what made Fire Emblem special, right? The generation and breeding system and all that. And there was nothing else like it. So 3 houses replaced the who should marry with political ideology. Each of the 3 houses presented a different ideology, and they each had their own strengths of how the solution to whatever the problem was. Like, basically, like, the other races were like, oh, a more nature approach, or the other one was more like the weak will perish and the strong will prevail. And the other house is like basically kiss ass for everything, like, we gotta do what we gotta do is protect everyone at all costs, or whatever. You could just select whatever house you want, but people may or may not play all of them. Like, who cares if you don't really have the same ideology as the other houses, right? When it comes to politics, people want to hear what they want to hear. They don't even care if it's right or wrong, as long as it aligns with their moral compass or whatever, right? Like, I'm not going to go too much into detail with that, okay? We're just talking about Fire Emblem. And then we have Fire Emblem Engage. In my opinion, the dog, like, that's it. It's over. Fire Emblem is over. I don't got anything to say about that one. If you like that one, good for you. Next, and then we had Fire Emblem Rings. You could summon legacy heroes. That was part of it, basically. I believe it had more of the spiritual meaning. So you had like spiritually weaponized characters, I guess, in that series, which is alright. It's nothing crazy. I didn't really like any of the setting, the color scheme, everything about it. I did not really like that much. I didn't even play Engage. It just looked like a downgrade, from the masterpiece Awakening. Everything, like, if you never played Awakening, or maybe your first game of Fire Emblem was 3 houses, bruh, you're gonna really ask yourself, like, what actually happened? Because that really, Fire Emblem really took a nosedive after that. The only thing Engage did best was, obviously, they focused more on the the visual aspect, like the combat, the animations, the map, and the interactions you could do gameplay wise. And then you had your emblem synergy. But other than that, that's it, right? There's nothing crazy. It's not something I would be excited to play or actually make time to play. I would just be like, there's Engage. I'm gonna disengage now. And that's it, I believe. We're back at this point of time. 3 houses had character depth, Engage has tactical polish, Awakening had inheritance, Genealogy had generations. Now, if they combine all those 3 into the upcoming, which they obviously had not, I still think Fortune's Weave is not gonna. As a true Fire Emblem fan, I'm not even a true Fire Emblem fan. As a semi, I don't even know. Just as a Fire Emblem, what's that, visitor, I wouldn't even put my time and day into Fortune's Weave. Other than the fact that it has a lot of characters, so that's pretty much it. So here is why I'm suddenly hopeful again, because Fortune's Weaves may or may not be adding any of those features, but hey, it's a new hardware, Switch 2, and it's literally the only Fire Emblem game coming out probably in the next decade. So we have Fortune's Weave. We're going to talk about that real quick. Fire Emblem Fortune's Weave is supposed to launch in September 17, 2026. This is an exclusive for the Nintendo Switch 2. The premise, we'll talk about the story a little bit. There's no spoilers. Basically, the Dagdan Empire exists under the gods in the heroic games. And you have 4 major heroes that anchor the story. So you're already locked in to certain characters and you're locked in to following the story, which sucks compared to other Fire Emblem games. This is a major blow to Fire Emblem fans, right? So now it just becomes your generic run-of-the-mill strategy RPG, honestly. Like, it's so generic now. Like, now Fire Emblem is not even special. It's literally generic. I wouldn't even be surprised if a Chinese game company came out with a better game, which is totally possible. They could totally just take their ideas from the previous Fire Emblem games and make a totally better one. You know, there's a lot of really third indie games like Troubleshooter Children, and they even had some other games too. There's a few. Not really that many in this specific genre. Well, anyways, you have Sai, Dietrich, Theodora, and Lita, and they already sound Fire Emblem because I believe they're like different nations and races. But the big twist is the time travel, where we're introduced to 5 years after the hero games. The Dagdan Empire pushes destruction after the resurrection of the demon god Balor, which I think is kind of mentioned a lot all the time as a mythical tale in the other Fire Emblem series. And then, you know, your fate with Fortuna and time travel and whatever, like going to the past and changing their fate and helping decide the future of the battle. It's just very overarching, you know, another evil versus dark kind of theme. But Nintendo did not announce any news about genealogy or awakening style breeding system or Fortune's Weave. So, you know, for most people, I feel like the Fire Emblem series now is not even on their radar, not even on their map. And it's just there, you know, it's a dying IP at this point. What made Fire Emblem special is not special anymore. But that's the price that you pay, right? A lot of things that are special are controversial. And the fact that they don't do it anymore, like all these different systems, you just become generic, you know. And we don't need generic games, guys. If you want your game to stand out, you gotta be controversial. You gotta go against the pop culture opinion. That's why Pal World was successful. But I digress. Moving on, the heroic games, the only systems you have compared to, you know, the masterpieces like Awakening, you can only train, learn techniques, recruit allies, explore, and basically just strengthen your army. Like, damn, we really went from greatness to lobotomized bullshit. Like, I don't know what to say, guys and girls. But like, if it's your first time playing a Fire Emblem game, maybe you'll think it's amazing. But when you play like the older games, like Awakening, you're gonna be like, damn, they really ate a buffet back then. And now, inflation, you're just eating a cereal bar. Not even a cereal bar anymore, you're just eating a crumb. God damn. And the only thing interesting is, you know, you have like the one lord in here. You have a different perspective, but it's not going to be like Fate or Revelations, where you can play different separate parties and experience different view. And this kind of comes closer, actually, to more of like Octopath Traveler. So in the beginning, you'll probably experience 4 different sides of the characters, and then they will all converge into a meaningful conflict, resolution, and climax. And I think that will probably it for like Fire Emblem Fortune's Weave. And then you have the time travel mechanic, which is okay, you know. They really made the time travel mechanic the whole aspect of the game. But let me remind you, there's a game series for the PS2 called Dark Cloud that really was way better. I don't know how it's going to work here in Fire Emblem. Maybe like, oh, the missing character or environmental changes or something. Like, I can't really see this being a really strong mechanic or selling point with Fire Emblem Fortune's Weave or whatever. You know, it would have been incredible if they could travel to the future and see what kind of kids you would breed. Yeah, they did that instead. Like, that would have been fun. Well, anyways, the dream version would be like Hero A marries Hero B, then you do a time skip, right? Like you travel in the future, right? And you influenced your kids to think that way. But it might be fixed, you know, it's probably a fixed story event now. And just like similar previous titles, or maybe not, you just have that one character that became like the king or the queen that you selected, and then the other characters would totally be different, which might be acceptable. Like maybe you play as the protagonist and you select male or female, kind of like the Violet one, and then your offspring was the only one that you focused on, just that single offspring, right? Maybe they'll do the same for this one. Maybe, I don't know. So it'll just be having one character that, and you ship only one person with your character. Well, this was okay. I guess that could work. You know, you only have a single pairing to worry about, and everyone else just dies, and then you get a new replacement of a new character cast, except for that one character that you focus your stats in relationship to, which I get. You know, that'll be fine. I don't even know. Anyways, the general system that I would want would be spanning just like Record of Agris for, you know, 3+ generations with the new game plus endless mode. So basically, they can use AI. I don't care what kind of algorithm they use, and they should have their own model generator that takes the likeness and patterns of characters and builds upon your stats. So let's say the max stat point is 99999. So maybe it takes like 5 new game pluses to get 99999 stats. And you just experience the same story again and again at this point, after probably the 3rd new game plus. And the way they can add these new portraits and stuff like that is obviously with the generator, right? You have a random sprite generator, a random model generator. But for the classes and all that and whatnot, it would be almost a similar thing, right? It would be the same thing. I would see how that would not be possible. It's possible. And I don't think it would cost that much resources implementing that kind of system. But we are not implementing that system because of political views and regulations, I guess, rules and laws, whatever. No, you could totally do that. So like you would have appearance inheritance, skill inheritance, class inheritance, personality inheritance, and that's basically it, right? And you could also have the aspect of like, maybe if you don't push the relationship with your characters, you just get a default. And this makes it feel like timeline is more important, because like, holy shit, if it wasn't for the historical timeline that Fire Emblem has, it wouldn't be anything, right? Because Fire Emblem is literally built on timeline, story-based timeline system. You know, parent-child, sibling-sibling, couple, grandparent-grandchild. That would be so crazy. That would be kind of weird though, you know, like, I don't know what age Fire Emblem will be doing, but you could totally see like one of your 50-year-old character being able to create a offspring character with the 2nd generation character. And that would just be like an interesting gameplay mechanic, but not morally widely acceptable, right? But that's the thing, right? We're not talking about, we don't care when it comes to gameplay. We just want to see how it affects the mechanics. I don't know. We're more interested in the gameplay, honestly. And then you can have like legacy weapons, like maybe the further along you go into like the new game plus with generation, you just create weapons that are strong, you know, like leveling up weapons. I believe you can level up weapons. There's like A rank spears, B rank spears, and then some weapons can give like exclusive skills, like with other games. And that's what really brought me back to, again, Agris War. They had most of these things, and it was super great, in my opinion. The game proved that you can have the marriage, children, the inheritance, and generational protagonists. So imagine if they did take Agris War, gave it the modern game treatment, added more stuff, throw in the AI in that shit. Like, it's possible. That would be the end game of all character strategy games, to be honest. But it would be nice. I mean, they can always keep coming up with more stories and whatnot, and interesting characters. So now it brings us to our final point: the future of Fire Emblem. The perfect formula right here, everybody. Take different parts of these games and make it the next Fire Emblem, because I don't think Fortune's Weave is gonna really deliver, especially to hardcore Fire Emblem fans. I don't think it's gonna be a hit. Take genealogy, take the generational consequences, you know, with like the politics and decisions that you make. Then take Awakening, take the marriage and the children system and the customization, take that system, then take the politics from 3 houses and the character depth that you could build, and the calendar system as well. And then like some of the building management from Revelations and Fate as well. Then take Engage, take the combat and the animations. And then I guess for Fortune's Weave, we can take just the time manipulation, because that's really the only new mechanic. And you combine them. So this way, you can probably just make a super Fire Emblem game where you can travel to the past or the future, right, during certain points in time, which can be optional. And these battles will dictate what the classes could be for the other characters. And then it wouldn't change how you would do a new game plus with the next generation. But it will definitely make an interest. Not interest, sorry. What word am I looking for? I'm too tired to think right now. Interest. A difference into how your characters will build. Damn, that doesn't even make sense. But anyways, just take those things from each of those games, and Fire Emblem will be cooking a buffet. So what I want, you know, being able to change the army, being able to change the future, being able to change the politics, change the bloodline, change your units, and change the ending. That's it. You know, it's fine if they have a predefined story already set, but that is a lot of work, you know. And depending if Nintendo and the developers are lazy or not, you know, it's really up to their discretion, you know, if they want to work that hard or whatever, which is fine, you know. It doesn't really matter that much at the end of the day anyway, because someone else will do it, right? And I really think that if we're ever going to see anything that's going to top record of Agris War or Fire Emblem Awakening, it's going to be a new company. Fire Emblem is at its best when who survives, who loves, and who has children that matter just as much as who wins the battle. Because I'm telling you, 90% of the players that play at Fire Emblem aren't really interested in the story that much. They're more interested in seeing the team or characters that they built finish or cross the finish line. That's pretty much the more interesting part about Fire Emblem, if you ask me. Because you know, after you read a lot of fantasy, or watch anime or movies, you know, just like Lord of the Rings and whatnot, Game of Thrones, you could care less about the story, right? I don't know, that's just my observation. Anyways, Fire Emblem started with a brutally simple idea. You command an army, you fight, many people died or gone. And then Fire Emblem asked, like, what if they can fall in love, you know, and have children, legacies, bloodlines, consequences. So if they want to make Fire Emblem great again, they need to put back the love, the war, The heck is going on? The bloodline. The aspects that make life worth living. Back into Fire Emblem, baby. And that'll be it for today's Walk, Talk, and Rock. I'm your host, Xaiyeon. Just look out to, I'll be playing Fortune Sweep, guys. I just want to announce that I bought a Nintendo Switch 2. You know, even though I'm anti-Nintendo right now. Well, basically I'm just I'm pro-consumerism, not anti-consumerism. You know, they optimize for us to spend money and lose money. Well, personally, we optimize to save money and build our own wealth. But, you know, you can't really build wealth when everybody is hoarding all the wealth, right? How do you build wealth in a world where the wealth is already being hoarded by the top 1%? Wow, that is a very trick question. Indeed it is. Hopefully Aristotle has the answers for that. Anyways, that's it for today's Walk, Talk, and Rock. I will be playing Fire Emblem when it comes out. I bought a Nintendo Switch 2 that was used on eBay. Hopefully it's working. And I will try to record footage of whenever Fire Emblem comes out and I get it. But yeah, I just wanted to throw it out there. And I'll be playing Xenoblade Chronicles 3. That's it for today. I'll see you in my next Walk, Talk, and Rock. Have a fantastic day.